Right. So, Faiz, so for those of us who are like really interested in this connection between religion and politics, this battle, like literally the Catholic fight on these questions has been interesting. But I want to say, like, if you are someone who is fundamentally interested in subsidiarity and federalism, which I could understand, talk to me about the empirics of what it means to take the programs like temporary aid to needy families, TANF, which replaced our AFDC welfare, and SNAP, which replaced the food stamps program, to take them from federal programs to block grants to the states, which is pretty much what we're seeing here in the Ryan plan. What are the empirical effects of doing that?
Well, you already know that the states are cash-strapped and don't have the needs to fill a lot of its own priorities, and so if you block grant this to states, they're going to use it to reduce their deficits. They have to balance their budget at the state level, which means that the first people to get cut are, of course, those who are the least influential and powerful in politics, and that is often the case with needy families. I think it's important to note that a lot of these grants, conservatives like to say, well, there's a lot of waste, there's a fraud, there's abuse in these programs. What you learn actually when you dig into the numbers is more than 90% of the money that's given goes directly to the people who need it the most. There is very little inefficiency in the program because there's no overhead. There isn't people trying to take a profit here. And when it goes directly to these people, they're using it to drive the economy. There's an economic argument for giving an extra dollar to somebody who's going to spend it and get the wheels of the economy moving.
And in fact, the president is undoubtedly politically going to take a lot of heat in this re-election cycle, but we were looking at the kind of welfare stimulus, the effect of federal recession spending over the course of the past couple of years, and the expansion of tax credits. The data are showing us are lifting 1.6 million out of poverty, extending unemployment insurance, lifting 3.4 million out of poverty, and expansion of the food stamps program, for which he was, obviously decried as the great food stamp president, lifting 1 million people out of poverty, right? So the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities is suggesting exactly this, that this kind of thing has a real impact. And yet, undoubtedly politically, there are ways in which just the language of welfare itself is going to be extremely unpopular for the president.
So this budget is budgets are always moral documents, and that should be the frame. 60% of the cuts in the budget are taking away programs for poor people, while $3 trillion will be redistributed to the most wealthy. So what does that mean? That means that this is actually an important organizing opportunity for the labor movement, for Occupy, May Day's coming up, to say, hey, Red America especially, you've been relying on food stamps more than anybody else. Yet your own members of Congress, your own representatives are trying to cut and eliminate that safety net. What would it have meant if you didn't have that safety net 2 years ago or 3 years ago? So I think this is an incredible organizing opportunity, and the question is, will progressive groups be able to step into this window and take advantage of it?
And that is one of the main reasons why so many women favor the Democratic Party, because women are identify very much with the safety net. They've only just begun to achieve economic independence in the last 20 years or so. They feel very vulnerable in the marketplace, and they want the safety net to be there. My guess is, as a result of that speech and his budget plan, Paul Ryan is not going to be on the Republican ticket as the running mate of Mitt Romney, because Romney doesn't want to, I hope, lash himself to the Ryan budget plan, which is intensely controversial and will turn off a lot of women.
But the budgets are moral documents, and it's important to tell the other side of the ledger, which is, what are the values of conservatives? Well, you see what they're putting their money on is corporate tax cuts. It's maintaining huge defense spending, and it's saying that, well, we think that food stamps is fraud, that it's going to people. And then here you go, on the front cover of the New York Times, you have a company dodging taxes, right, in the United States. They're protecting hedge fund loopholes, people who are dodging taxes across the United States. That's where the fraud is. Like, you want to talk to me about fraud? Talk to me about health insurers who are kicking off people from their health coverage who need it. So I think that this conversation of who is government supposed to protect is ultimately the question that we should be asking ourselves, and in that ledger we have to protect those who can't protect themselves.
And in fact what we're going to do is, as soon as we get back, we're going to talk about exactly how the rate of poverty ballooned right after we ended welfare as we know it. Of the welfare state is Dorian Warren, Bill Schneider, Anthea Butler, and Faiz Shakir. Okay, we found, in kind of digging around numbers, this one just absolutely blew me away. From 1996 to 2011, the number of U.S. households living on $2 a day went up by 130%. So 1996 is welfare reform, ushered in by a Democratic president and a Republican Congress, ending welfare as we know it, often still on the language of the back of, as you were pointing out, Faiz, there's all, there are these welfare queens, there's all of these people who are stealing and taking for the system, and the impact has been 130%. Well, I don't know if it's the impact. It's the correlation of it, is that 130% increase in the number of U.S. households living on $2 a day.
You know what we did during the 90s with these budgets is that we reduced poverty and we reduced the deficit at the same time. You can actually do that simultaneously. And people don't understand that they think of it as a zero-sum trade-off. One goes up, the other goes down. In fact, it's a question of where do your priorities lie, and we've been talking about that all morning. John Boehner was on an alternative network this morning talking about Mitt Romney's wealth and said, well, American people don't want to vote for a loser. Suggesting that, well, if you don't have wealth, if you're not somebody at the top of the totem pole, you're a loser. That kind of, I think, governs the ethic of how conservatives tend to view those people who are not pulling themselves up by their bootstraps and succeeding. Remember, during the Judge Sonia Sotomayor debate, President Obama said, I want somebody with empathy. What ended up happening there was, oh, he wants somebody who's going to look out for people at the bottom. You know, we can't have that. And there was a firestorm about the fact that we would have an empathetic person in a position of power.
Yeah.
The key to that phenomenon is growth. If the economy is growing, as it was growing in the late 90s under Bill Clinton, then you can solve poverty, you can reduce the deficit, you can perform miracles. As I said, Democrats believe growth has got to be necessary, but it's not sufficient. You also have to have measures to ensure fairness.
Yes, so growth is necessary but not sufficient, because there was growth in the economy, but in the low-wage sector. So we were forcing people, when we weren't locking people up, we were forcing people into low-wage jobs. And one of the biggest problems today is this wage theft. So even if you work at a job, you don't get paid often for the 40 hours, if you can get 40 hours a week to work. You don't get paid for 40 hours.
Well, they don't want to pay 40 hours because then you have to get benefits, right? They want to get benefits.
So we're pushing people into the low-wage labor market and saying, oh, you need to work, but yet people can't even survive on the jobs that they have.
And if they can get into the low-wage market, let's talk about the people who are past the 99 weeks on unemployment, who won't get any more unemployment. They're not getting any food aid. Where do these people go? And see, this is what I try to talk about students. It's like this circle, right? You know, we're going to say we're going to cut this, we're going to cut this, but then we want to reward the wealth on top. And then what ends up happening is that you've got all these people at the bottom. You keep increasing that number, and you're saying you're not going to do something to take care of them. Where are they going to go? And this is where I think the anger begins to rise up. And I think even for Republican people who think that they want to vote for these guys who say, I just want to increase wealth, they can't rise to the same wealth that a Mitt Romney has. They never will be able to. It's inherited. They can't leave anything to their kids.
But it does feel like there is, even, among the poor, among the working class, there is still this kind of American work ethic that says, yes, we want people to be able to take care of themselves, but we truly want them to take care of themselves, right? It does feel to me like in all the folks that I talk to across parties, that there is a bit of a pushback against the idea of the American welfare state.
Well, there is, but remember, this is where the fairness issue comes in.
Yes.
Fairness works as a campaign theme when the economy is terrible. And the middle class says, I'm struggling to make ends meet. They're the key constituency.
Exactly.
I can't make it. People who are good, hardworking, God-fearing Americans like me are having trouble. There must be something wrong with the system. It isn't fair. When the economy is good, the fairness issue doesn't work because middle-class people say, things are pretty good in this country, and I'm doing okay. If the people aren't, maybe it's their fault.
For every dollar that we give out in food stamp programs, SNAP, $1.73 of economic activity. It's a good investment. When we give out EITC credits to low income.
Tell me why. So if I'm not an expert, why when I give $1 in food stamps do I get?
This is simple economics. If you're living day to day on a paycheck and you give that person an extra $1 or $5, what are they going to do? They're going to go spend it. And then when they spend it, the engine of the economy turns. People can produce more. There's more service in the economy, and we've now got a good economy.
So we actually create consumers by giving people food to feed their families. We create consumers that drive the market.
We've had an EITC, earned income tax tax credit in the United States where we give money to low-income people. And what ends up happening is we end up lifting those people into a tax bracket, end up getting the money back into the federal treasury. So these are good investments. So I say on the productivity and growth side that when you have hunger in the economy, studies have shown you lose $170 million in productivity. When you have child poverty, you lose about $500 million in the economy in productivity. These are obvious to people who can empathize with the fact that if you are hungry, you cannot learn. If you are hungry, you cannot work. If you are sick and you have a child at home, you cannot go and be productive. These are obvious and sensible economic investments, and I think we can make that case.
So I just want to make two quick points. The first is, of all rich democracies in the world, we are now the least mobile society. We're right up there with the UK, meaning you're more likely to stay in your class position now than even 10, 20, 30 years ago. So the myth of the American dream is now a nightmare. We don't have mobility. People cannot move up. Secondly, in terms of the broader Ryan budget, we have a 2-year experiment in austerity politics. It's called Europe. England is now in a double-dip recession. They cut social spending. Greece, Spain, Ireland, all these countries have done exactly what Paul Ryan wants to do.
Austerity.
Austerity.
Hold it together.
And especially,
cut it.
especially cutting social safety nets, depending on the poor and the working class. So we have a 2-year experiment in this, and it has not worked.
The austerity experiment in Europe has failed on 2 grounds. It was supposed to increase confidence of the investor community. It has not done that. Spain had austerity, and their credit rating was reduced. And look at the political impact. Sarkozy may lose as the president of France next Sunday.
Indeed.
And the government in the Netherlands has fallen. Spain, Italy, Greece, Portugal, Ireland. Governments are falling all over Europe.